recorded live.
Welcome to the Virtualization Security Roundtable podcast episode number 078. We're live from the Virtualization Field Day, and I'm surrounded right now by Virtualization Field Day delegates who will be our guests this week. Normally we have on 4 industry panelists, Eben Rodriguez, who's actually working at eBay as a security expert and architect. Michael Berman is the CTO of Catbird. Hema Prafachandra is the chief CTO. Well, actually, she's a CTO now. I always have the wrong thing written here. From HITRUST. And myself, Edward Holetke, a.k.a. TechFieldDay and the VMware Communities Forum, author of the book VMware vSphere and Virtual Infrastructure Security, Securing the Virtual Environment, which is available on Amazon. So, as I said, our special guest panelists are the Virtualization Field Day number 2 delegates, and there's 13 of us. So they'll actually introduce themselves as they come up and speak. But today's going to be a little bit different. Normally we have vendors on expounding how their product is better than everybody else's. Well, all the delegates are actually end users. And I would like to hear from them about their virtualization and cloud security nightmares, success stories if there are any, problems that they're facing, and maybe we can help each other come up with some solutions. So, with that, who would like to go first? No one? Please introduce yourself.
Hi there, I'm Dwayne Lessner. My blog is itbloodpressure.com. I'm an infrastructure specialist at an oil field company. Most of my time is spent in the end-user computing space, and wouldn't really say I have success stories because it's hard to define. You don't really know your gaps until they happen. So, but I think a common theme for virtualization is the tools always kind of lag behind. I know in past roles we were faced with using tools that didn't have integration with like edge endpoint, for example. So we're using older tools that created lots of network bottlenecks. But on the bright side too, some of the tools of VDI, like the recompose option, we've had antivirus bad DATs come down and hit us and take out system files, and so a simple reclone, we were able to get our environment back up or recompose. So stuff like that's been pretty good. But
which antivirus vendor are you using? Can you tell us?
McAfee.
McAfee, okay.
So
are you using the virtualization aware version, or are you just using the generic McAfee?
Both. The one with the bad DAT, at that time, that was just the normal physical install.
Okay.
And then now we're using the Move product from 1.6. 2.0 is out, but it's not supported on vSphere 5. And their endpoint integration is GA in April timeframe.
Correct. Yeah, that's what I've heard. So the Move product, if people don't know, is actually a virtualization aware product that will know that you're in a virtual environment and time the scans appropriately, so they're not all happening at the same time across all the hypervisors. So you don't get a scan storm, which is just as bad as a boot storm.
The original Move product, I think it got beat up a lot not having the integration, but it actually kind of, there's talk about dual hypervisors in environments, and that kind of actually they have a good setup for it because they're not using any of the APIs. It's just really redirecting the traffic to get scanned. So you could do a VMware or Zen or whatever you want to do, and they'd still be able to move across your environment and still have protection. So from that point, it seems like it's good from that perspective, but a lot of overhead and management problems to deal with.
So anybody else have anything about antivirus they want to bring up? Now, there was actually news in the industry on antivirus this last week was Kaspersky announced that they have an endpoint product. Now, so there's now 2 endpoint products that are actually shipping, Trend Micro's and Kaspersky's.
There's also Bitdefender.
Bitdefender hasn't, is they shipping now?
I'm not 100% on that.
And neither am I. I know they have something, but
I'm assuming so. There were webinars with VMware, so I would think it's so, but maybe not. I can't speak to it.
That would be Bitdefender's SVE product, which I know that they're doing a big push at our site conference next week. So, and they had announcements. Didn't even know about that one. Bring it up. Come on.
The only other news that I know of is there was. This is Curtis Preston. So there was announced a class action lawsuit against Symantec for the auto renewal problem, where customers are saying that they've opted out of the auto renewal and they still get renewed, and so it's a pretty big lawsuut, over $75 times,
130 million people.
Yeah. that's about the only thing I heard of going on this week.
Okay. And no, Christopher online asked us, did we ask Symantec about their vShield plans? And no, we did not. That was the wrong group. We were with their backup and data protection group. They have a different group that does antivirus, and they actually have a different group that does a different type of anti-malware that is actually not integrated with anything right now. It's an agent inside the VM.
Maybe it's just rumor mill talk, but I was told they were originally the first company VMware asked to go ahead to get that out of the gate, but I'd be curious to know what had happened there.
I don't know. I've heard that same rumor, but I have not heard any confirmation of that was the case. I know they went to the top 3 vendors at the same time. So that would have probably been Symantec, McAfee. I don't know who the third one would have been. Could have been Trend. They went to Symantec, McAfee, and probably Trend right up front when they came out with Endpoint. And now Trend is actually one of the only ones that has a product until now.
The antivirus question, what comes up in my mind is these new products like Bitdefender. How does an enterprise judge them to get them into your environment? Because they don't really have the street credibility of some of the bigger guys.
So I was thinking the same thing. I know a lot of Bitdefenders on laptops. I know a lot of Bitdefender and Kaspersky are on home computers. I haven't really spoken to them about that myself, but that's actually an interesting problem they have. I mean, they're talking about being in the virtual desktop space. So I imagine if you're using Bitdefender and Kaspersky in your environment today for your desktops, you probably just transfer into them. I think that would be their big win.
Like as a new storage startup, you can kind of get into people's test environments, but from a security perspective, you want that kind of overarching same thing everywhere. You know what's going on, so like you can't even really break into a test silo, I would think.
Actually, it's really surprising. I get a lot of questions from people right now in my consultancy where they're asking about what's out there, what's new, what can I use, because they're tired of the same old, and they want to say, I need something that's virtualization aware. They need something that actually fits the environment instead of overwhelming the environment. So that's where the people that are using Endpoint get their biggest wins. Now, if you've got a company that's a pure 100% Symantec company, chances of them switching are probably nil, or a McAfee company. That's a case of, I've heard a lot of people saying, we do it this way, we're going to continue doing it that way, and when they come out with a product, we'll use it. That's a question. I've spent so many millions of dollars on licensing that I'm just not going to waste money by getting rid of it, because that would literally be a waste for them. So in Greenfield, I can see this being very, very important for them.
So Ed, this is Brandon Riley from VirtualInsanity.com, and just to add to what you were talking about, it's not just a cost argument in a lot of companies because, I've seen companies with greenfield environments where they had to make new purchases of licensing, and since they were, married to the Symantec as a company, for so many products, they went ahead and did that anyway. So even though it would they're still paying for a product up front for new licenses. They weren't willing to switch because, we're comfortable with Symantec. We know Symantec. We already use it.
Absolutely. It's management and the whole works. It's politics, it's management, it's how I do my things today. It's a big shift for people to say, I'm going to change. But there are a few companies doing that.
I think from a VDI perspective, there's some wiggle room, because if you can get a higher density, like 100 users using a different product, there's quite a bit of ROI to make that change.
Absolutely. And you can also easily bring them in and show beyond a shadow of a doubt that endpoint security is going to perform a lot better than having traditional agents. That's a clear win right there. Traditional agents all running at the same time will destroy a SAM.
My vCloud experience is fairly small, but if anyone has any expertise on actually moving from one cloud to another and that endpoint following, or at least maybe the policies don't follow, but at least on both sides you have endpoint running with some type of antivirus. Well,
remember, right now to move from cloud to cloud, you have to actually export. And if you're using vCloud Connector, for example, from vCloud to vCloud, you actually export into an OVF, which will drop out any special customizations out of the config file, which could be the ones for endpoint. And then when you move the OVF, and then you pull it back in, and it's new, fresh in your environment. Unless they're doing it in real time now. No. That's Rodos. Come on over. The musings of Rodos. He's here. Since it's vCloud, he knows this all inside out, backwards and forwards.
Yeah, so that's one of the big challenges with people trying to use vCloud. A lot of the functionality just that you're used to in the enterprise isn't there, and so much gets dropped because of the way that you import things from security and networking configuration, etc. So, the industry and the vendors have a while to go on that, which is why we're at the TechFieldDay and we saw Zerto yesterday automating a lot of that configuration and doing integration. So it's good to see that vendors are actually starting now to get it and build solutions that work.
Absolutely. If you tie something like an A4 Solutions with vCloud Connector or with Zerto Replication, you're actually getting an encrypted data store, which is really important in the cloud to have data at rest encryption, but the data in motion is still not encrypted. So while that means that data at rest, what does that mean? For a cloud, that means if you ever lose a drive and you have to throw it out, the data on it, your tenant data is encrypted. That's all that means, so that you have a safe disposal mechanism. Now, if they can ever do encryption in motion, now that's a clear win, but no one's done it yet, that I know of, except for encrypting in the VM, and that has its own pitfalls.
Have you ever heard of someone making decisions based on what the cloud provider is using for storage? Whether they're kind of using their homegrown thing or if they're using, one of the big players in NetApp or EMC that are kind of claiming multi-tenancy. Like,
we had a couple of podcasts on multi-tenancy in the cloud. Right now, there is trusted multi-tenancy in the cloud, which means that I, as a tenant, have to trust that the admins of the cloud are going to do the right thing and not look or modify my data. And I also have to trust that the vendors have the proper security measures in place for data at rest encryption and so forth. So whether or not it's a NetApp versus EMC versus IBM versus Pure Storage we just talked to, I don't think it makes a difference at that point. You have to actually layer in security on top of it so that you get that data at rest encryption, but that's as close as you can get. Secure multi-tenancy just plain old does not exist today, not by my definition. My definition is that the cloud admin has no ability to modify, see, or ship off my data to somewhere else that I don't have any control over. I'm preventing them from doing everything. And that my tenant data is segregated and fully segregated and not able to be seen by another tenant. So that level of security just doesn't exist today. I still have to trust the cloud admin does the right thing.
I see that being...
Do you agree with that?
Mostly, yes.
Well,
Yeah.
what's the mostly part?
I think the other interesting thing is denial of service.
Oh, yeah.
I can tell you two stories from the reality of the wild. We were standing up our VMware vCloud installation over a year and a bit ago, and we had our security teams doing an internal penetration test. We have our own security teams. We're a carrier, so we've got those people in-house, and we were able to do a denial of service from one tenant across the entire environment. There was a bug in the Nexus 1000 software, and if you forced bad packets into the Nexus, we were using Nexus 1000. If you forced bad packets into that, it would totally freak out and cause the VMware hypervisor to think that the networking stack had spin locked, and eventually, after a couple of seconds, it would crash and purple screen of death VMware, and that meant
that's been fixed, right?
And that has been fixed.
Thank you.
That is, thanks. This is when Hoff was working at Cisco, and I very quickly contacted him on Twitter, and we were on to engineering, and they'd already sort of found it, and we were on to VMware engineering very quickly, and we got some fixes very quickly. But you wouldn't know who else you were affecting, but you would basically take out a part of the infrastructure.
Absolutely.
And so you'd get moved just as much as everybody else would move, and then you could just keep doing it, and you could just take out the whole cloud. So we found that one ourselves. There was another provider who rang me at home one day and said, hey, did you see the latest one? So there's actually a bit of a other problem that I've seen in the wild with BPDU Guard. So often you'll find that people when they're using you as a cloud, you don't know what they're doing, and they love to do really interesting, crazy things that you never expected. So they'll go, hey, I've got this machine, let's set up a VPN and an IPsec tunnel from who knows nowhere into the cloud, into a Windows machine. And so they'll configure it up, they'll install their VPN software, probably just thinking it's like their desktop, and they'll go and configure it. But Windows, as soon as you go and configure the VPN, as soon as you fire up the VPN, will actually start, pumping out these BPDU packets. Now, the standard when you use VMware and Cisco UCS and a whole pile of things is to actually block BPDU Guard. The interesting chain of events that you can get when that happens is that VMware will start shutting down ports. Now, depending on the particular implementation you have, that then starts actually kicking out all ports, which can take out storage and a few other things, and you can very easily end up in a situation where HA gets initiated. So that takes down and isolates that blade, and then it restarts the VM with the VPN on it on a different blade, and it starts sending out BPDU guards, and then VMware, and depending on your configuration.
So this has been fixed as well?
And people are working on this, how to work around it and what the best configuration is, because it's a real interaction between what's happening in VMware and what's happening at your networking, and depending on whose best practice you follow.
I wonder if you could use an introspective firewall to actually block the BDU guard packets, because you can actually do that type of blocking inside of most of the introspective firewalls. vShield app, you can do it inside of Trend Micro, you can do it inside of vTrust from Reflex, and I don't know about Checkpoint, but most likely with their VF1, you can probably do it in VGW. So maybe there's an alternative solution for these guys to do an introspective firewall to fix that problem, at least temporarily.
Yeah. And so it's the denial of service as a cloud architect and somebody who's building them that I worry about just as much as security. You always have to worry about security because you're protecting your customer's data, but you also worry about one customer hurting another customer in terms of performance or outages, the noisy neighbour, just as much as you worry about honeymoon periods and things like that as well.
Absolutely. Because the noisy neighbor problem is not going to go away ever. I mean, if I bought a gold level of service let's say I have a platinum, gold, silver cloud, like everybody says I should have one of these tiers, and I buy the highest level, I'm going to expect to be able to get the highest level all the time. And as you get more and more into there, you don't build out the environment big enough. You could actually DOS just on standard network traffic. Everybody else in that same tier. We're not talking catastrophic failure, but you're talking about the noisy neighbor. It's all shared resources. So having chargeback actually, or showback, may be the best way to go and solve that problem.
If the activity that's causing impact is actually a chargeable event, because it might just be IOs or something like that. And this is where QoS comes into it, so that you can show fairness. Some people always think that QoS is all about actually only when we get contention, but sometimes you may want to not over deliver.
Absolutely,
well.
Quality services is huge for the cloud. And that's why resource pools are used, and network quality of service and storage quality of service settings should be employed. I imagine most clouds don't have that.
Not at all layers.
Yeah. So that could be a huge problem. Anybody else want to have a question on vCloud comment? Or any cloud for that matter. We're not VMware-centric here.
I mean, another point for that, is it fair to ask to get really high security on the cloud admin not to see anything when inside of our own domain we don't even have that level of protection from the people managing our own systems?
It's called trust. So when I hire someone, there's a exchange of trust. I'm trusting you as an admin. You're, as the tenant, you have no idea who the admins are for the cloud. So how do you have that exchange of trust? That's the key. So if I'm hiring you, I have the right to fire you. If I go to a cloud provider, I don't know who that is. I can say, oh, I want this level of certification. I would like this level of classification. I want like this. So if I'm working with a 3-letter acronym in the government, I guarantee you the people there have the certain levels of classification. That's a setting of trust. So I know I can trust them based on that. And there also was another one that was like a bonded trust for admins that was out there, and I don't know where that's gone. So if you have some way of measuring trust, then yeah, that's fine. But if you don't, it becomes a real issue. I mean, will your bank go to the cloud? That's a big question.
And my argument is always that yes, the bank will go to the cloud, and the bank probably is already using the cloud because those organisations are so large. They have a diversity of security requirements, and so just because some of their workloads aren't suitable for the cloud doesn't mean all of their workloads are. But I'll agree with Edward. Nobody fall off their chair. But, really, the measure of security in many ways in the cloud today is about trust. And people trust different organisations differently. Because I'm lucky enough to happen to work at a carrier, we can say, well, we already see your data. It already comes across our network. If we have access to it, we've got it through other means. It's just because it's in our cloud as well. It's coming through our other infrastructure. However, some of our customers also encrypt their data across our network.
Absolutely.
So even though we're seeing it, it's interesting. Nearly all of our customers don't. Some do. They're typically the banks and the governments, etc. So yes, we can never see their data. Our operators can never see their data. And those types of workloads probably won't go into our clouds. But the rest of it, the data, we can see it anyway. You do have the issue, though, depending on the type of cloud service that you're offering, because you've got, infrastructure as a service. Ultimately, it needs to be unencrypted at some point, and you need operators who have that access. There's always that human error or human aspect. Somebody mentioned yesterday about the army solves it by a guy with a gun at the door. But, some organisations have different levels of operators as well. So we have, secure operators who work in secure rooms and police checked and all that type of stuff, because we operate things for governments and in defence and all those types of things. But yeah.
And then that's a level of trust. You've built it up, and you can actually tell your clientele that we have done this for this level of that.
But at the end of the day, we need more. We need more tools, we need more systems, we need more functionality to be able to deliver more security, because it's what we all want. It's what the providers want, it's what the customers want.
So the reason why you need this level of trust is that once the data hits the hypervisor, the admins can read it, see it, and do anything they want with it. Not below the hypervisor, and maybe not in the VM, but as an admin, I can still get into the VM. So I can still see your data as an admin. So that becomes the key issue. And Preston, you have a question, comment?
Yeah, this is Curtis Preston from Truth in IT.
Sorry.
A couple of things. There was what I think is a really good white paper written by NIST recently. Have you guys discussed it already? If you just Google NIST Cloud Uses white paper, it's like 60 pages long. You can learn a lot just by reading the first 3-4 pages. And one of the topics that they certainly discussed a lot of elements of security with using the cloud. And one of the things that they brought up is a point that I have often mentioned, and that is, we talk about this issue of trust. The funny thing is, we have this inherent trust in the person we hired, right? Which is possibly and quite often unfounded.
Absolutely.
And then an inherent distrust in this person or this entity that is just a vendor, and we don't get to fire them, right? My experience, and I throw this out just for comment, I'm a backup guy, but I've also seen the security side of things. That security, to me, seems to be a lot like backup in that it's one of those jobs that it's a really tough job that no one wants to do, right? There's a few crazy people like us that want to do it, and a lot of companies do it really, really poorly. And that potentially a company that moves from an internal cloud or non-cloud environment to a public cloud environment is potentially moving from a less secure to a more secure environment. Just a thought.
Are you saying that it could be harder for an external person to go postal as opposed to an employee that you're pissed off?
No. I think that the concept, what I really like your part was when you were talking about how that you've got these people that are, they're trusted and they've been vetted and all of this stuff via different levels of security. My point is that these companies that are doing cloud-type services, be it storage or VMware or whatever, is that they are entire entities that if their security is proven to be crap, they will cease to exist as a company. And so I would seem to think that they would take it even more seriously than the average Joe. I'm not trust but verify, right? I'm all about, right, checking them. But I see this inherent, because I talk about cloud in my seminars, and I see this inherent, the big crossed arms, and I'm not going to move my data in the cloud where I can't see it and I can't manage it, and so I just say, maybe the guy in the cloud will do, no offense, sir, but maybe the guy in the cloud might do a better job at security than you will.
Actually, we did cover that in a couple of podcasts back about the fact that some people feel that the cloud could be more secure, and that it is. I mean, it could be less secure. For some workloads, it's perfect. For some people, it could be more secure because generally they do have more security, but you end up having to pay for it. So if you have to pay more for it, you may not do it or get that level of security because, hey, I have to pay for it. Like, for example, if I want the ability to run forensics inside of a cloud, say Terramark, and I'm a government organization, I have to pay up front for the ability to do that before it's even needed. Because if you've got to do it when it's needed, it's too late. So cost is an issue for cloud providers for providing these levels of services. Could it be more secure? Absolutely. Is it? We don't know. And the main reason, what we did in the last podcast, a couple podcasts ago, is that we said, yes, it could be, but we couldn't prove it. And that's the key thing, is that if I have to trust but verify, how can I verify that their security is better when I can't even audit them to start with. Now, cloudaudit.org and all that is trying to move towards that auditability, but we're not there yet. I can't go to Amazon and say, hey, I want to audit you. They'll say, go away. We don't do that. You sign the paperwork that says you're not going to do it. So that right to audit as a small guy is hard to get. As a very large guy that's spending millions of dollars, yeah, that's actually fairly easy to get from some providers. At last year's InfoSec World down in Orlando, which actually is coming up at the beginning of April this year, they had one company come in. They said they sent out 140 questions for security to all the cloud vendors, and they were shocked by who did not respond. Effectively, they're saying your questions were too intricate for me to even be bothered for your business. They had plenty of business. So it was actually the bigger guys that didn't respond, which was rather intriguing. By the time they were done with the summit, they added 12 more questions. So that's a continually growing list. And they keep on sending it out to cloud providers and get new answers. So they're trying to verify before they even launch, which is an interesting way.
I don't know who coined the term, but the economies of skill. You think if you're a cloud provider, you definitely would have that on your side. You can take the time to answer a couple questions. But
there's a lot of people. There's actually some of the cloud providers are spending more time answering audit questions from subpoenas and legal than they're actually doing anything else. So they can't. I mean, this is a big deal.
But one of the advantages, though, on the topic we're talking about is there are so many different levels and skills, even of particular types of audits. So in a single company, you're faced with maybe an internal audit, maybe another audit from a particular organization that's external, and that's it. And they may or may not require proof of what you're telling them. So in a cloud environment, they're facing audits from so many different agencies that you've got to at least have some kind of sense that they're a little bit more adept at being compliant, or at least proving that they're compliant than your average company who's being audited by maybe one or two outside corporations or agency.
Well, agencies that have to be PCI compliant, for example, get audited every year or every quarter or every half year, depending on what they have to do. So they're getting audited almost all the time. Do they do self-audits? Absolutely. So they know how to do that, and they know how to deal with that. HIPAA also has some audits. SOX has audits. GBLA has audits. Almost every company is being audited. That if they're publicly traded, believe me, you're being audited. So are the cloud providers publicly traded? Most likely not. There's a few, like Verizon and AT&T and the big guys, absolutely. Do they have to deal with PCI and HIPAA and SOX? Only when they have those tenants. Overall, not really.
But they have that infrastructure in place
to do it. Absolutely. Yeah. And they would actually have to be, like, for example, a cloud that services PCI the cloud provider will go through a PCI audit. Now, me as a tenant of that cloud, I may have to say, I actually have to go through my own audit for PCI if I'm doing PCI in that cloud. So I, as a medium, large business, I have to attest that, yes, I've done everything I can do. And then I have to say, hey, but I'm in a cloud, so I have to refer to this cloud provider's PCI audit, whether they passed it or not. I still have to refer to it, so it becomes part of scope.
Would you do your own audit as the customer, and then the cloud provider does their audit as well?
Absolutely. You have to, because it's whoever's dealing with the data gets audited. So it's all the way down, or can be all the way down.
And what are you seeing for tools to automate that process? Like Configuration Manager seems to be talked about lately.
If you're doing vCloud Director or VMware Config Manager has auditing reports, but that's so you can actually improve your own compliance before the PCI auditor comes in, or the HIPAA auditor comes in, the GBLA auditor comes in. So they're used as for ongoing improvements. Remember, compliance is in security, and security is definitely not compliance. They're totally different beasts. So having visibility and transparency for security is different than having visibility and transparency for compliance. I want the one for security if I'm dealing with security issues, and I want the one for compliance if I'm dealing with compliance issues. So VCM is a tool, but who uses it? It's not multi-tenant. Not yet. Not with the version that's currently out. So the cloud provider will be using it to improve their overall, not yours. Right?
Yeah.
So if you're a tenant, you have to deal with your own stuff. If you're a client, if you're a cloud provider, you have to deal with it as well. There's no way around it. I see a lot of nodding heads here. Anybody else have any other comments? Questions?
Yeah, I think this is VM Rick. I think one of the biggest enablers of that will be the VXLAN implementations going forward.
But I didn't get that.
I think that what you'll see is...
sorry, a UDP joke.
UDP joke? Sure.
Yeah, we're all good.
I don't know how to respond to that. But yeah, as you see more and more VXLAN implementations around, private and public clouds, you'll see that separation of tenancy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It has to start somewhere.
Yep, and that also goes along the same path as you don't have to build out another infrastructure just to meet one demand. You can actually plug that into your current infrastructure and leverage what you have versus, and that'll be big for cloud providers going forward, especially the public cloud providers. The fact that it can be defined, for security reasons and for compliance.
Absolutely. I think that's a big step in the right direction because right now the debate is, do I trust VLANs or not? Well, if I have VXLAN, I may have to. There's a level of trust that hopefully will be there.
Yeah, I got a question about that, you guys. This is even. So by VXLAN, isn't that a proprietary protocol that's only implemented by a few vendors? Are we not talking about software-defined networking in general?
Absolutely. Software-defined networking, whether it's OpenFlow, VXLAN, is a very important piece. Because I can do software-defined networking to ensure I have compliance and security for tenants.
I know AT&T was one of the big companies that announced support for Nicera, and one of the things they're talking about doing is giving each tenant the ability to create their own virtual networks. And this is independent of VLAN. And those virtual networks can be tunneled back to their headquarters data center, wherever, make a mesh pretty much. It can all be encrypted. So how do you audit that? You just ensure that the traffic on there is encrypted and then you leave it at that? There's no real way to say what's going on inside those networks.
There is.
It's probably a good thing.
But there has to be. It's software defined, so I can audit the configuration at the very least.
Yeah, so you basically audit the flows, but you can't tell what type of data is in there, right?
Well, if it's encrypted, no. Unless you have the keys.
And the other thing along those lines is we recently saw a demo. I forget the product name, but it's kind of a cloud virtualization visualization tool. It allows you to see what's going on in your cloud, and it kind of makes this 3D model that you can spin around. And it was very interesting because one of the things they showed would be good for this is the data flows. So if you have servers of customers, they should only be talking to specific other systems if they're not public, like web servers. So if you see two different customer systems kind of talk to each other in a specific traffic pattern, then that could raise an alert, like for a hack attempt, for example.
Yeah,
I wonder how cloud providers are going to provide security tools like that to their customers.
I have not seen anything besides portals or portlets. I know Reflex VMC and vTrust provides portlets that can be put into the portal of the cloud provider, not the vCloud portal, but their own. So that does exist for that for the VMC tools.
Yeah.
I do know that Catbird has something similar as well.
Well, it makes me think that it's getting to be where it's possible that a cloud provider could offer a service to their customers that says, hey, if these are your enterprise systems and you can tell us that they're only supposed to be communicating with your other enterprise systems, then we can alert you if there's any abnormal traffic patterns and, help monitor the security posture of your cloud, basically.
I think that would be wonderful, even. Go out and implement it. I don't know if anybody does it yet, but I imagine you'd end up paying for it for the cloud provider because the software would try to be fairly expensive, especially when you're talking about that much data. And then it still has to be a multi-tenant solution. I mean, I know, for example, Xenos has a multi-tenant solution for performance monitoring, and it will allow you to do it and show the data to the tenants.
Right.
And that actually is incredibly valuable. But again, I mean, you would have to pay for that use because it's an expensive piece of software, especially with that many hosts and machines and VMs involved.
Yeah, it's all about the data. Once you get the data and you can figure out how to make it multi-tenant to access the data, then you can start looking at how you can set up alerts that your tenants can use.
I think that would be a great idea. I don't know anybody doing it right now, but I think that's a great idea and great use of those tools. I look at performance management tools as early warning systems. They're running every second, every minute, where my security tools are looking at log files. And it takes a while to parse a log file, and it's usually after the fact. I want to find out, as close to the problem, what happened. If I notice a spike in traffic to my web servers or to machines that normally don't have traffic, I want to investigate that as a security.
Yeah, it needs to be immediate. So that's part of your incident response plan. I believe that is part of the different PCI compliance and other compliance initiatives that you have to have an incident response plan, and you have to respond to incidents within a certain amount of time.
Yeah, but it's when you get notified of the incident that it's actually crucial. So if your notification time is 5 hours after it happened because the way your tools work, that means your incident response could be a half hour after that. You're still way too late.
Yeah, so I don't know if anyone's had experience with that on the call, but it seems to me that would be grounds for failing an audit if it took 5 hours to get notified of the potential attack.
Does anybody here have an experience with being audited and notifications and incident response? A lot of shaking their heads even. They're not security guys.
All right.
I know in our environment, even internally, the PCI area is totally cordoned off and separate virtualization hosts, and it's locked down. So I think there's a lot of work to be done before, in our neck of the woods anyway, that gets carried off into the cloud.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that.
Let's just talk about a virtualized environment. Aren't you supposed to be notified in that environment if someone is attempting to access it and they do not have access?
But it's a different group of people for this particular customer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so for Dwayne's company, it's a totally different group that handles that. So they actually divided their infrastructure and virtual environment based on the compliance requirements, so that it sounds like, so that the PCI people and the HIPAA people and all those things that are heavily compliant, they're dealing with their own environment. Unfortunately, they're not here with us.
And it's a small piece of what we do. I wouldn't, from a number perspective, it's minute compared to the size of the rest of our environment.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a special use case. Right?
Yeah.
Very special use case for you.
And that just goes around, agencies that come in and actually do audits, having a concept around what is secure, right? They look at it and they say, yep, it's physically plugged into this host. It's physically plugged into this host. And I think as more education goes forward in the virtualization realm around security, they're going to get more and more savvy to how everything's broke up inside that environment.
Yeah, we've been saying the same thing for 5 years.
Yep. I have to believe that at one point it's going to get to that level where they'll just say, okay, now we understand how everything's segregated within this environment, and now we can mark the approval for whatever your.
Gee, when will that happen? You have a prediction for us?
I have a dream.
Come on, Rick.
Well, I don't know. I hope that it'll be within the next couple of years.
I hope so too.
I'm a very optimistic person, and I think that, you know, as if we're to move into that realm in a more how should I say this, expeditious way into this cloud infrastructure for multi-tenancy, that's going to need to happen, and that's going to need to happen in order for public clouds to succeed, without having them to break the bank to build up a new infrastructure just to support this or just to support that.
I guess you need some reasons why you'd want to even use a public cloud. I was the last VM.
You're already using it. To be honest, how many people use Google for anything? That's the public cloud. How many people use Dropbox here? You know, that's the public cloud. How many people are using Salesforce? That's a SaaS, effectively a public offering. So we use public cloud day in and day out.
But I think what Dwayne was trying to...
Yeah, more of the enterprise
infrastructure as a service.
Yeah, right.
That first ability to say, I don't have enough compute resources, I need to burst out into my public cloud provider just to give me some more resources just to get a workload done. Is that what you're referring to?
That's right. From what I've seen recently, like, it's Amazon touts, you know, they give you a number what they're going to charge you, but it's beatable with your own staff. And it's not that hard of a use case. And I think we're all going to be judged as infrastructure people to beat that and to get those densities. But
it all depends on how fast you can scale too. Yeah. And it's if you have the room. If you have the room, right.
That ends up being the key is you have the resources, you have the room to do your own cloud versus going out and buying another one. If I was to do a public cloud, I'd probably first look at Terramark and Verizon and AT&T or another if I'm using vCloud, even the vCloud vendors like Blue Vault and so forth, to determine if they're a possibility over Amazon, because vCloud and Amazon don't talk to each other yet. Not directly. So, you can go through third parties.
Let me ask you a question about that. Why is it so important to you what underlying infrastructure is at the public cloud provider? Is it the ability to move virtual machines back and forth, or is it your management tools? What is good about that?
Well, right now, since the apps are encapsulated in virtual machines, it would be the virtual machine motion. The agility of being able to launch the virtual machines.
What if you could take a VMware virtual machine from your enterprise and import it to Amazon? Wouldn't that be good enough?
Yeah, and there's tools to do that. Cloud Shift, I think. Can't remember what the name of the company is, and my apologies to the company. But there are tools that allow you to do that, but you have to send your data through a third party. You know, or you have to do the transfer yourself.
And that conversion process becomes time.
So the guy was saying that he would rather use AT&T or one of the other providers that already offers a VMware hosting solution, right?
If it was me personally, it was me even. If it was me personally, yes, because I'm dealing with VMware VMs. If I want to push it out somewhere, I want to have the knowledge and comfort that what I'm pushing out to will run that VM with no problems. Translating and converting, I mean, we all know how bad PDBs are. B2Bs for different operating systems is just like a P2B. And Curtis has a comment still on that.
So I'll be the naysayer. So really, you expect VMware to cooperate with Amazon?
Me personally, no.
Okay, it's never going to freaking happen. I'm sitting over here arguing on an email about backup vendors and archive vendor support for LTFS, right? Which is, I know nobody on this call cares about.
Well, actually, I do.
Okay,
it's a different story.
But it's about the ability to move your data easily from one archive software vendor to the other because the tape format. LTFS is the LTO file system. It makes the tape look like a disk, and if an archive software vendor wrote in that format, you could easily, if they decided to get out of the business, as some of them have, then you could easily move your archive tapes, to another vendor and just easily import them, as opposed to the way it is in the backup world where every single tape is its own format.
And then you have to convert it. And
Yeah.
It takes time, and you may lose
Yeah,
something.
it's basically the same. It's the same argument. There may be tools to help you do it, but
at that point, that's a great example. At that point, if a vendor came to you and said, "I have an archive solution for you that can take those tapes and read them into this archiving solution, and you'll have access to your data for the next 7 years," or whatever your standard says you need to have access for them. But the data lives at Amazon, and it's all encrypted. Would you care? I mean, if the cost was reasonable and everything else worked out, why would you care where it was?
Because Amazon doesn't have 5 nines, to be honest. I would be very, very concerned about that.
Does your tape backup drive have 5 nines?
No, I would be.
That was someone else answering your question to me, but
it's data. It's availability, and if I'm going to put it on storage somewhere, instead of tape, I'm going to be wanting that availability.
Now, mind you, it's not my world, but you were just talking about you'd like to be able to easily move a VM from one thing to another, and any of the tools that are currently offered involves conversion, and that involves manual stuff and work and risk of the conversion not working and all that stuff, and you just want it to just work. And I'm just saying that's never going to happen. That's all I'm saying.
So basically, it sounds like we like we're familiar with the VMware tools and products and how to make machines work. So it's more convenient. It's less operational risk for us to stick with the same vendor for our cloud than to try changing it. It would be too much risk.
Well, if I had an eucalyptus-based cloud, I wouldn't mind going to Amazon because it's the exact same format. If I had Cloud Stack running Zen Server, hey, it would be pretty much the same format too, or OpenStack.
And if I had an LSD-based cloud, I'd be fine.
So, I think it's based on the comfort of where you are today versus where you're going.
So basically, it's the operational aspect. There's technical issues we've been talking about, but on top of that, of course, it always comes back to the operational aspects as well.
I would say yes.
And draw off here, I think eventually, we do see standards coming into play, and even though vendors don't want to talk, eventually there'll be a lowest common denominator standard. We've seen that with Ethernet and things like that. We're talking about cloud. It's the wild, wild west. It's the very start of an industry. Every vendor is going to spend all their time working on their secret sauce and what's different with them. And I don't think we want to standardize some things too early because we will hamper innovation. We've got to wait for this industry to mature a bit and some winners and some losers and some acquisitions and all that kind of stuff. We're already getting some standards. A lot of people are taking the Amazon APIs and sharing them out. But, we're at the start. We're not at the end, and we shouldn't be thinking like we're already at the end of an industry.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Absolutely.
That's a great point. So you mentioned Ethernet, and that was standardized. And I wonder if we could spend a second talking about the OVS standard for virtual machines. If VMware has their VMDKs and whatnot, but isn't OVF kind of becoming a standard for virtual machines to move them around between hypervisors?
Well, ask Microsoft about that one. Ask Citrix about that one. While they both will read OVS, they don't write OVS directly. So until you get all the hypervisors involved in the same standard, using it day in and day out, I think we have a problem with conversion.
So if we were to follow the same path as Ethernet, we need a standard for moving virtual machines between hypervisors before customers can look at using different hypervisors in the cloud.
I would agree with you there.
Yeah, OVF does have some heavy hitters as far as people who are supporting it. Just looking it up, I see Red Hat, VMware, VirtualBox, IBM Power. You've got a lot of these heavy hitters that are out there standardizing on this OVF format. It's just going to be a matter of time before Microsoft or Zen actually comes around and says, yeah,
the thing is Red Hat doesn't standardize on it. They support it.
Support it, yeah.
But KVM doesn't write it.
Yeah.
But it does read it.
Yes. Yep.
So reading it is one thing. Writing it is entirely different.
Yeah.
I still have to convert.
Yep.
Today.
So, Ed, what you're saying is they make it really easy to put your stuff into their environment, but to get it out, it's not so easy, right?
I think that's the key.
Isn't it Paul Moritz who said Hotel California, you can check in, but you can't check out.
Like everywhere else in IT.
Yeah.
And that's actually another problem with the cloud I see is if a cloud provider goes away, what happens to your data? How can I get it?
Right. So that's great. They all have really easy to onboard, but getting out is something that we should insist is also easy. And that will improve trust that we have in those types of providers.
I mean, how do you do that in what you guys do? Do you have, like, special insurance clauses?
Yeah, so this is where you've really got to be careful, and I'm surprised how many people don't read contracts.
Oh, I read them.
You've got to put all this in your contract, and you've got to very carefully spell out who owns the data, where the data will reside, what happens at service termination, and how long a customer has to extract their data, and is it before or after it's terminated, and who can terminate the relationship. But then you've got the whole issue of, well, it doesn't matter what the contract says. What happens if the company goes out of business and they're not paying their bill, and so maybe they're leasing their hosting area or something, and somebody else takes all that away from them. So
that's a good point.
It
could be something like if the cloud provider goes out of business, some other person buys the cloud provider's assets, they could end up with your data, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's why a lot of people, they only want to work with really big companies because they want to know that you're big enough not to die, and you're big enough to sue. Because some smaller companies they'll just fold.
There's actually been a number of small clouds that have failed, and they have actually never been able to get their data out of it. Specifically, there were a couple of years ago, about 2 years ago, there was a storage cloud that did that, and no one was able to get their data out.
And in many areas, there's nothing new under the sun. This will be the same with, whoever's storing all of your tapes, off-site. You've got data around, you've spread it around. You want to be careful like you are with many other things that you do in your business.
See, I know a lot of people that if they use Dropbox, they also store it somewhere else on their systems or on their libraries. I know people in the cloud that will actually, like, for example, they're using Salesforce, but they'll suck their data down once a day.
And whoever does that with Gmail, who has a copy of their own Gmail?
The thing is, can you?
Well,
you can have Outlook or a mail client connect to Gmail, download your mail to like a PSD file, and it's always going to be there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it can be done, but I know very few people who do it. We've got one in the room.
We've got one in the room. Well, two, really.
Two.
Or if you use a Mac, that's also the Mac mail client, for example, keeps a copy of your Gmail local.
Anything that speaks IMAP will actually be able to do it. And we have these non-fruit type people in the room.
I would never advocate for using a Mac or mail. Really any
Somehow I think Windows computers do support IMAP as well, don't they?
It's amazing, yeah.
Really? Wow. Things have moved up in the world. Who would have thought?
Yes, who would have thought? So what we can take out of this is the discussion, since we're at the end of our hour, is that you have to have some level of trust with your cloud provider that they're do the right thing and read your contracts. It still becomes a part of the issue. So part of that team that comes in before you go to the cloud has to include legal, has to include security, data protection, compliance. Even the app owners and app developers should be part of that.
Whenever I speak, I always ask the audience, how many of you people are technical? And nearly all the audience puts their hand up, and I say, well, next time, bring somebody from your legal department. Bring somebody from your finance department, because they need to understand this new world just as much as you do, because your legal department is going to start reading contracts that they don't understand. You're going to go to your finance department and say, hey, you know what? We used to be doing internal costing this way. You're going to find internal finance, you're going to have to do it this totally different way, and you're going to freak out. They are just as important to get on board with your company to adopt cloud as the technical people.
Actually, I think there may be a little bit more important.
Yeah.
Today.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a lot of customers that struggled with cloud or even virtualization because of their asset management would, keep track of which departments owned which machines. And when you're going virtual, they didn't have any way to deal with that. So they had to figure that out first before they could start using it for their systems.
First, kill all the lawyers. This is Curtis Preston again. One other issue that I don't think you brought up is the issue of physical residency, crossing country
jurisdictional boundaries.
Yeah.
We've talked about that one on the podcast several times.
I'm sure.
And it's still a big issue.
And that's what I mentioned. You want to look in the contract who owns the data and where, what geo is it in,
Yeah.
and what legal entity.
And that becomes a major legal issue.
And the other legal issue that, and I was trying to find it to talk about it, but I remember hearing several months ago that the U.S. Supreme Court had ruled that that you have a lower expectation of privacy if your data is stored in the cloud, as opposed to inside your own data center. I can't find the precedent. I only spent like 5 minutes looking for it, but that was a ruling that I remember hearing about.
But you as an individual employee of a company
This
do not have expectation of privacy.
No, this was speaking of
corporate data.
Corporate data.
Okay.
That and the Patriot Act. That.
So can we remember that companies are people too, right?
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that one up. But basically, if the Patriot Act, if the powers that be feel the need to get your company's data, if it's stored in the cloud under current law, not only can the cloud providers provide the data to them, they are prohibited by law of telling you that has happened.
Absolutely.
That at least if it's in your data center, that can't happen. They
Right.
at least will.
That's kind of like
you will know.
wiretapping, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So you still need a court order. So thank you, everybody, and this has been another Virtualization Security podcast. Everybody have a great day. Thank you for listening. And
Thanks, Ed.
And Virtualization Field Day number 2 delegates, I really do thank you for joining in.
Thanks.
Sort of my next